Ladies and gentlemen, tonight, we venture into a chapter of history where reality is far more terrifying than fiction. We often hear the name Dracula and picture a mythical, blood-drinking creature of the night, a figure of fiction who haunts our nightmares. But behind this legendary vampire lies the chilling reality of a real man, a prince whose tales of cruelty and brutality still resonate with a terrifying intensity and chill the human soul to its core. His name was Vlad III. Born in 1431 in the fortress town of Sighisoara in Transylvania, but history remembers him by his most dreaded title. Vlad the Impaler picture 15th century Europe, a tumultuous world where empires constantly clashed, and the daily battle for survival was paramount. In this chaos, the small principality of Wallachia, Vlad's homeland found itself precariously caught in a vice, crushed between two colossal powers, the mighty Ottoman Empire and the formidable Kingdom of Hungary. Vlad's father, Vlad the Dracula, was a knight of the Catholic Military Order of the Dragon, sworn to fight the enemies of Christendom, which earned him the name Dracula, meaning the dragon. Vlad III proudly adopted this name as Dracula, meaning son of the dragon, although his enemies would later interpret it as son of the devil. The roots of Vlad's extreme cruelty and his deep-seated hatred for the Ottomans lie in a harrowing chapter of his childhood as a boy. He and his younger brother spent years as political hostages within the vast Ottoman Empire it was during this period of Turkish custody. In cold prisons and under foreign rule, that young Vlad was exposed firsthand to warfare, betrayal, and relentless cruelty, an experience that hardened his soul into steel. When Vlad finally returned to Wallachia to claim his rightful throne, he was no longer the boy who had been forcibly taken. Instead, he had become a man utterly shaped by hatred, an insatiable desire for power, and a burning vengeance. What followed was a reign steeped in violence, as he embarked on a ruthless campaign to cleanse his land of both foreign invaders and internal dissenters, utilizing absolute brutality as his primary tool. His most infamous instrument of terror was not a sword or an axe, but something far more agonizing and symbolically potent, a simple wooden stake, sharpened to a fine point and driven into the earth. Its application, however, was anything but simple. It was a masterpiece of torment that Vlad wielded as a devastating weapon of psychological warfare. The purpose of this horrifying execution was not merely to kill, but to deliver a death so slow and excruciating that it would implant permanent fear into the hearts of all who witnessed it. The method of this execution was a chilling study in calculated cruelty. The victim was typically forced onto the sharpened stake in such a way that the point would enter their body, often through the abdomen or rectum, but would deliberately avoid piercing any vital organs immediately. The victim's own body weight would then tragically do the rest, causing them to slowly slide further down, while the stake rose inch by agonizing inch through their torso. This torturous and humiliating spectacle could last for hours, sometimes even days, with the victim remaining alive, fully conscious and forced to feel their own death approaching. The stake was often oiled or sharpened to prolong this horrific experience even further. Vlad did not reserve this horrific method solely for his foreign adversaries, such as Ottoman soldiers. He also turned his brutal justice upon his own people, particularly those he perceived as threats or disloyal. He was intensely threatened by internal dissent, especially from the wealthy noble class known as the boyars, whom he held personally responsible for the assassination of his father. And older brother boyars who opposed him were impaled by the dozens, and entire villages were massacred if he suspected treachery. Vlad swore revenge upon the boyars, and he exacted it on a day when they least expected it, on Easter Sunday. Vlad extended an invitation to all the major boyars and their families for what appeared to be a grand feast at his court. As they were eating, drinking, and celebrating, his soldiers abruptly surrounded the hall and he had them all arrested. The older and weaker boyars were immediately taken outside the palace and impaled on the spot. However, the younger, healthier men and women among them were subjected to an even more protracted ordeal. They were forced onto a long and torturous journey, marched for miles on foot, to the ruins of an old fortress known today as Poenari Castle. Here Vlad compelled these nobles, who were accustomed to lives of leisure, to undertake the most grueling task of their lives, rebuilding the castle with their bare hands. They were starved and worked relentlessly like animals, until their expensive clothes literally rotted off their backs. Many perished right there from exhaustion and hunger, while those who survived stood as a grim, living testament to the ultimate price of betraying Vlad. Perhaps the most famous and chilling tale of Vlad's brutality is the one known as the Forest of the Impaled. In 1462, the formidable Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II the very same sultan who had conquered Constantinople, invaded Wallachia with a massive army, knowing he could not directly face this colossal force in open battle. Vlad resorted to a strategy of sheer terror that was unprecedented in the history of warfare. As Sultan Mehmed's army approached the Wallachian capital of Targovis, they were not met by an opposing army. Instead, the sight that greeted them was something born from a fevered nightmare. For miles, as far as the eye could see, stood a ghastly forest not of trees but of stakes, and on every single stake hung the decaying body of a human being. These were the Ottoman prisoners Vlad had captured, and it is estimated there were over 20,000 corpses on display. This horrific scene shattered the morale of the Ottoman army, with a stench of death hanging heavy in the air, and the silence proving more terrifying than any battle cry. Sultan Mehmed to himself, a man renowned for his own bravery and ruthlessness, was utterly stunned by the spectacle, reportedly proclaiming, "How can I take the lands of a man who is capable of such deeds?" To save his nation and himself, he refused to advance further and ordered his army to retreat. Vlad had not won the war in a conventional sense, but he had achieved victory through an unparalleled display of terror. Vlad's cruelty was not confined to the battlefield or grand acts of retribution. A famous story recounts how, when two Ottoman envoys appeared before Vlad, they refused to remove their turbans. Citing it as a sacred tradition, Vlad, with a chilling smile, claimed he wished to strengthen their custom, and then ordered his guards to nail the turbans directly to the envoys' heads. He also harbored a pathological hatred for any form of dishonesty or poverty in his land. According to one macabre tale, he invited all the poor, sick and vagrant people of his realm to a great feast in a large hall. After they had eaten their fill, Vlad had the doors barred from the outside and set the entire building on fire, claiming he was relieving them of their earthly troubles, so they would no longer be a burden to anyone in his twisted mind. This was his form of justice. Vlad's psychological warfare was devastatingly effective, making fear his ultimate weapon. Whispers of his unimaginable cruelty kept his enemies awake at night and ensured his subjects remained obedient by force. In his view, terror was the most effective means for maintaining order, and impalement was his definition of justice. Foreign travelers even wrote of how safe the roads were during his reign. For fear of meeting a horrid fate, thieves dared not steal and betrayers dared not plot. Security in Vlad's realm came not from peace, but from the ever-present threat of pain. Perhaps the most chilling accounts of Vlad's ruthlessness are those from within his own banquet halls. It is said that Vlad would sometimes dine casually, beside impaled corpses, laughing and drinking wine, as their bodies twitched in their death throes. This wasn't merely punishment. It was a grotesque theater of cruelty, where Vlad was the performer, the judge, and often the only audience who truly mattered. No one was truly spared from his wrath. In some cases, he even executed entire families, ruthlessly wiping out bloodlines to prevent any future revenge. No alliance was sacred and no plea was heard. Despite his horrifying methods, Vlad the Impaler is viewed by some in Romania even today, not merely as a tyrant but as a complex national hero. To his defenders, he was a savior of Wallachian pride, a leader who, through harsh laws and unimaginable methods, protected his small country from powerful enemies and stabilized it from within. He staunchly refused to bow to the Ottomans and rejected foreign interference, ruling with an iron will to an invaded nation. He was seen as a necessary evil, a guardian, a hammer against the encroaching empire. His rule eventually came to a brutal end in 1476, when he was ambushed and decapitated in battle. His head was sent to Mehmed II in Istanbul, preserved in a jar of honey as a macabre trophy, while his body was buried in an unknown grave. Centuries later, in the 19th century, the Irish author Bram Stoker became inspired by these chilling historical accounts. While creating the character for his famous 1897 novel Dracula, Stoker encountered the name Vlad the Impaler in a book on Eastern European history. He found the name and its bloodthirsty reputation so utterly fascinating that he borrowed it for his immortal vampire count, and thus history and fiction became forever intertwined. While Stoker wrote of bats and Gothic castles and a thirst for blood, the real Dracula's thirst was not for blood but for fear, vengeance, and absolute power. Vlad was at once a savior and a monster, a patriot and a psychopath. His story serves as a stark reminder that the horror of the real world can often be far more profound and complex than any fictional ghoul, and that the monsters hidden in the pages of history are most often chillingly human. The tales of Vlad the Impaler continue to send shivers down our spines, proving that truth can be stranger and far more terrifying than any fiction. Join us next time as we delve deeper into the shadowed corners of history.